Chapter 19, A spring break in England. Wednesday walked into the Weathervane Cafe, the bell above the door chiming softly. Tyler, already behind the counter in his barista apron, looked up from steaming milk as she approached, his usual grin fading as he noticed her more serious than usual demeanor. "Quad?" Tyler asked, the familiar teasing note in his voice, though his brows knit in curiosity. Wednesday didn't immediately respond, instead fixing her eyes on him, her expression unreadable. "My parents asked me to invite you for spring break in England," she said, her voice calm, detached, as always. Tyler blinked, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. "Why is your family going to England?" Wednesday's gaze shifted briefly to the window before she turned back to him. "You remember my cousin Judah? Was he the guy who was showing off his girlfriend/fiancé?" "That's him," she confirmed, her tone flat. "They are announcing the engagement of the Addams estate there. All Addams need to be present in order to scrutinize what's her name." "Scrutinize?" Tyler echoed, brow furrowing in disbelief. "Isn't that a bit harsh?" Wednesday's lips twitched, though her face remained impassive. "They've known each other for years, but we only found out about her on my birthday last year. Remember how Judah went around introducing her to everyone?" Tyler nodded, a slow realization dawning. "And that's a problem because the last time someone suddenly appeared and married one of our family members," she said, her voice cool and distant, "we got robbed. Worse, she broke my uncle's black heart." Tyler's expression softened in sympathy. "That must have been rough." "I can't imagine." "It's fine," Wednesday said, her tone flat. "We didn't get our money back, but she died." The words seemed to hang in the air between them, heavy and final. "So, will you lie to your dad again, or do you want me to send Adele to convince him?" Tyler gave a low chuckle, rubbing the back of his neck, the tension still lingering from her earlier words. "No worries. Lucas and his friends are going out of town for spring break. I just have to tell my dad that I'm going along with them. Besides, I already have a passport." "How about a plane ticket?" Wednesday asked, the faintest edge of practicality in her voice. Tyler smiled wryly. "I hardly touched the money I made working for your dad last summer in Alaska. I can pay for the round trip." Wednesday's lips curled, a ghost of a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "If you're sure." He nodded firmly, unbothered by the slightly unusual nature of her offer. "I'm sure." And with that, she walked out, leaving Tyler with more questions than answers as he turned back to his work, already planning for the unexpected journey ahead. Tyler arrived at the airport, his travel bag slung over one shoulder as he scanned the bustling terminal for familiar faces. The bright lights and hurried crowd felt a world away from the quiet of Jericho. As he walked closer to the gate, his eyes immediately landed on the Addams family, who were gathered near a large window, taking in the view of the tarmac. Morticia, resplendent as ever in a deep black dress, was adjusting the collar of her jacket, her expression serene but piercing. Gomez stood beside her, wearing an impeccable suit and a manic grin, practically vibrating with excitement at the upcoming trip. Wednesday was standing slightly off to the side, her signature raven black braids now neatly tied at her back, arms crossed as she observed the chaos around her with her usual deadpan intensity. Her younger brother, Pugsley, was playfully tugging at the hem of Lurch's sleeve, trying to get the towering butler's attention. As always, Lurch seemed to be doing his best to ignore him, though the slightest twitch of his eyebrow betrayed a hint of amusement. And, of course, there was Thing, who had perched himself on a nearby chair, disembodied fingers absent-mindedly flipping through a magazine as if this were all just another mundane outing. "Tyler, you made it." Morticia's smooth voice greeted him, her eyes glinting with that hauntingly pleasant warmth. Tyler flashed a smile, nodding as he approached them. "Wouldn't miss it for the world." He paused, glancing around. "Are we all ready for takeoff?" Gomez clapped him on the back, nearly knocking the air out of him. "Ah, mi amigo, ready for adventure? This trip is going to be fantastic. I can already taste the scones." "You always taste the scones, darling," Morticia remarked with a slight smirk, her eyes twinkling. But this time, there will be much more than that to savor. The engagement is crucial. Tyler raised an eyebrow. It sounds intense. He shifted his eyes to Wednesday, who had yet to speak. She gave him a small nod, but her expression was guarded, as if something weighed on her mind. "We'll be there soon enough," Wednesday replied, her voice low but firm. "And then we'll see if their engagement stands the test of scrutiny." Before Tyler could ask anything further, a familiar, authoritative voice interrupted them. "Is everyone here?" Addams asked as she stepped toward the group, her gaze settling on Tyler with a knowing look. "Ah, Tyler. I see you're already here." Tyler smiled at Adele, slightly relieved to see a familiar, more grounded face. "Adele, you made it. I was starting to think you'd send a missive to keep us all in line." Adele gave a playful roll of her eyes. "I think the Addams family can manage their own chaos just fine, Tyler." She shot a glance toward Wednesday, who had been unusually silent. "Don't you agree?" Wednesday simply nodded. "I'm not here for small talk." "Of course not," Adele said with a light laugh, moving closer. "So, are we all set?" Gomez, ever the enthusiastic host, clapped his hands. "Yes. We're all ready. We're just waiting on our plane to arrive." "And I'm sure, Tyler, you're excited to see the Addams estate in all its grandeur." Tyler smiled. "Can't say I've ever been to an estate quite like that." Adele leaned in slightly, her tone shifting to something more serious. "Tyler, I trust you've been keeping out of trouble while you've been hanging around the family?" She shot him a knowing glance, her voice low enough so only he could hear. Tyler chuckled nervously. "I've been doing my best to avoid that kind of trouble." "Well, good," she said, her eyes softening. "I know you're here to support Wednesday, but I've got an eye on you." Tyler raised an eyebrow. "What does that mean exactly?" "Just remember that you're not just representing yourself on this trip," Adele said, her voice taking on a more serious edge. "You're also representing the people you care about, and that includes Wednesday, and, by extension, the Addams family. Don't let anyone take advantage of you, got it?" Tyler met her gaze, a quiet understanding passing between them. "Got it." Just as their conversation ended, a loud voice called out over the intercom, announcing that it was time to board. Gomez immediately began ushering the group toward the gate, his enthusiasm infectious. "To England, my friends. To family. To love." Tyler took his place behind Wednesday as they filed onto the plane. They were greeted with luxury befitting the Addams name, the seats, plush and spacious. Once everyone was settled, the plane began to taxi toward the runway, the whirring sound of the engines growing louder. As they ascended into the sky, the conversation began to shift toward the reason for their trip. "I still don't see why we need to scrutinize her so closely," Tyler said, glancing at Wednesday. "I mean, you've only known her for a short time." "Because," Wednesday said, her tone measured and cool, "last time someone joined the family out of nowhere, they caused quite the disaster. We'll be sure of her intentions this time." Adele leaned in, her voice low, but clear. "Wednesday's not wrong. The Addams family doesn't take marriage lightly. There's a history to these things, and I'm sure that's part of why they're being cautious." Tyler looked around at the others. "But why does it feel like there's something else going on here? Like everyone is keeping secrets?" Wednesday met his gaze, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Because we are." Adele chuckled softly at the exchange. "Welcome to the Addams family, Tyler. There's always more going on than meets the eye." As the plane soared above the clouds, Tyler sat back in his seat, the weight of the journey ahead starting to settle on his shoulders. He wasn't just there for a vacation anymore. He was about to be part of something far more complicated, and possibly dangerous, than he'd ever imagined. The Addams family had their secrets. And Tyler had a feeling he was about to uncover a few of them. As the private car rolled up the gravel drive, Tyler peered out the window at the sprawling estate. The mansion loomed ahead, a towering, centuries-old structure that appeared almost to rise from the mist, its Gothic spires cutting into the gray sky like jagged teeth. It was everything Tyler had imagined when Wednesday had described her family's heritage, an ancient, foreboding building that seemed to have witnessed centuries of secrets, betrayal, and untold histories. However, what struck him most was the contrast. The estate itself was tucked into the heart of a vast, wild garden. Thick vines curled around the stone walls, and lush, overgrown trees reached toward the sky, as if the mansion was half claimed by the forest. The grounds were immaculate but gave off a sense of abandonment. The trees, although alive, appeared twisted, their branches gnarled in unnatural shapes. The flowers were vibrant in color but seemed almost too perfect, their hues unnervingly vibrant, as though they had been plucked straight from a fever dream. Yet, despite all this ancient beauty, Tyler couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As the car slowed to a stop in front of the main entrance, he noticed the lack of any welcome party. No butlers. No distant relatives. No servants rushing out to greet the family. Wednesday, who had been silent throughout the drive, was the first to step out of the car, her gaze fixed firmly ahead. The others followed, each with their own sense of purpose. Gomez, ever the dramatic one, wasted no time adjusting his impeccable suit and striding ahead with an almost theatrical flourish. "Ah," Gomez breathed, grinning wildly, "this place never fails to impress. It's like stepping into another world, isn't it, mi amor?" Tyler, who was still standing near the back of the car, raised an eyebrow. He hadn't seen anyone coming to greet them. No sign of Judah or the fiancé, who, after all, were supposed to be the reason for the trip. "I thought we were here for an engagement," Tyler said, glancing back at the others. "Where's everyone? Shouldn't someone be here to greet us?" Wednesday, as usual, didn't provide much of an answer. Instead, she simply motioned toward the looming mansion with a slight tilt of her head. "It's not unusual," she said, her voice as cool and measured as ever. "It's customary for the Addams family to arrive, quietly. We don't need fanfare." "Not here." Tyler wasn't entirely convinced. He hadn't expected an extravagant welcome, but surely there should have been some acknowledgement of their arrival, especially given the weight of the occasion. Adele, who had stepped beside him, seemed to read his mind. "It's odd," she admitted, her voice low. "But remember, this is a very particular part of the Addams family. They don't do things the same way we do." Pugsley, who had already bounded ahead, dashed up the marble steps to the heavy wooden doors. "Are we going in or what?" he called back. Gomez, ever the optimist, gave a deep, exaggerated sigh. "Always in a rush. But yes. Let's get to the heart of it, shall we?" As the group entered the mansion, Tyler was immediately struck by the stark contrast between the estate's outward appearance and the interior. Inside, the rooms were massive, their vaulted ceilings stretching high above. The walls were lined with towering bookcases, shelves brimming with antique books and dusty curiosities. Elaborate suits of armor stood at attention in the corners, as if the place had been frozen in time. Long, sheer curtains hung in the windows, slightly drawn, casting the rooms in shadow. And yet, despite the ancient decor, there were touches of modernity scattered throughout. Classic cars, Rolls-Royces, Bentleys, and other luxury vehicles lined the cobblestone courtyard just outside. It felt as though time itself had been suspended, and the estate lived in an eerie blend of past and present, each existing in its own dark harmony. Tyler's eyes roved around the room, but still, no one had greeted them. No sign of Judah or his fiancée, whose name still escaped him. It was only when they walked deeper into the mansion that a figure appeared, one he hadn't been expecting. A tall, lean man with sharply defined features emerged from the shadows of the grand foyer. His dark, slicked-back hair matched the deep black suit he wore, and his expression was an unreadable mask, neither welcoming nor cold, but somewhere in between. "Ah, cousins," the man said smoothly, his voice carrying a deep, melodic quality. "I trust you've had a pleasant journey?" Tyler was taken aback by the casual tone of his greeting, given the absence of any apparent welcome. He assumed this must be Judah, but something in his posture made Tyler hesitate. "I'm Tyler," he said, extending a hand cautiously. "I didn't expect the place to be so quiet." Judah's lips twitched into a thin smile. "Yes, well," he said, looking past Tyler to Wednesday, "we prefer things understated. No need to announce every arrival, as you'll soon see. But I'm glad you've made it. We have much to discuss." Judah's gaze lingered on Wednesday, and Tyler noticed the subtle shift in the air. Whatever tension there was, it seemed to be concentrated between Judah and Wednesday. "Is everyone else here?" Wednesday asked, her voice steady, but Tyler could hear the faint edge of impatience beneath it. "Where's your fiancé?" Judah's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second, but he quickly recovered. "Ah, yes. My fiancé. She is getting ready. You must excuse her, she's not used to all the attention. It's a delicate matter." Tyler glanced around the room, noting the way the shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally long. "Delicate?" Judah's eyes met his, sharp and assessing. "Very delicate." It was then that Tyler felt a chill creep up his spine. This was no ordinary engagement. Whatever secrets the Addams family had been hinting at in Jericho, it seemed like they were all about to unfold. As they walked deeper into the estate, Tyler couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every hallway they passed, every creak of the floorboards seemed to echo with a strange tension. Whatever lay ahead, Tyler had a feeling it would be more complicated than he'd ever imagined. There was more to this engagement than just a simple marriage. Much more. The grand dining hall was an exercise in opulence and mystery, a room built to impress, and yet, somehow, it was suffused with a sense of foreboding. The walls were draped with deep crimson velvet, the flickering candlelight casting strange, dancing shadows across the vast space. A long, black table stretched out before them, already set with gleaming silverware and crystal goblets that caught the light in an almost unnatural way. Tyler had barely noticed the details, however. His attention was fixed on the figure who stood in the doorway. Judah and his fiancée Leah had just entered, and every eye in the room was drawn to her. Leah's appearance was striking, almost otherworldly. Her pale skin seemed to glow under the dim light, contrasting sharply with the black of the room. Her blonde hair, which fell in soft waves around her shoulders, shimmered like strands of gold. But it was her eyes, striking, pale, and almost too bright, that captured the room's full attention. They were unnervingly mesmerizing, like the eyes of a siren, and their unblinking intensity was enough to unsettle anyone who dared meet her gaze. There was something disconcerting about her, something that made it hard for Tyler to look away. As Leah stepped into the room, there was a palpable hush, as if everyone was collectively holding their breath. Even Judah, normally so confident and poised, had a stiffness to his movements, his smile faltering as he glanced around the room. There was no warmth to the greeting, no joy in the air, only quiet scrutiny, as the Addams family took in the new addition to their circle. Tyler found himself beside Wednesday, his hand gently resting against the small of her back as he escorted her to the table. His own thoughts churned as they walked in. Why was everyone acting this way toward Leah? He thought. He had a vague understanding of the Addams family's protective nature, but the tension in the air was so thick it could be cut with a knife. He didn't get why the scrutiny was necessary. As they approached the table, Tyler muttered under his breath, "Is this really necessary?" Greg, Adele's father, who had been quietly observing from his seat, leaned in close to Tyler, his voice low and measured. "Everybody lies, Tyler." Tyler blinked at the sudden remark. "What?" Greg, as usual, was the one to speak plainly, his expression cold but calculating. "People don't do things for free, not without a reason. It's not always malicious, but everyone has an agenda. Adele says the same thing, never trust anyone who shows too much interest unless there's something in it for them." Tyler frowned. "Adele said that before. I get it." But still, his voice trailed off, not entirely convinced. He couldn't quite wrap his mind around what it was about Leah that felt so off. She wasn't doing anything overtly wrong, but something about her presence seemed to make everyone uncomfortable. Greg seemed to read his thoughts with a practiced glance. "There's a million reasons to lie, and only one reason to tell the truth," he continued, his voice unwavering. "And the truth isn't always convenient. You're lucky," he added, shifting his gaze toward Wednesday, "that one she never lies. She sees no reason to pretend." Tyler's lips quirked into a slight smile at Greg's words. "Yeah," he said, his voice softening. "That's one of the reasons I like her." Greg gave a rare smile in return. "Lucky for you." As if on cue, the conversation shifted again when Judah and Leah reached the head of the table. It was then that Adele, who had been standing with them, voiced her opinion, loud and clear. If Judah really wanted Leah to be welcomed here, he should have introduced her to the family when they were dating, Adele said, her voice carrying a sharp edge. She wasn't wrong. The entire room was still skeptical of Leah, and they hadn't even started dinner yet. Not after they're already engaged. "It's a little too convenient, don't you think?" Wednesday, who had been relatively quiet until now, spoke up. "Adele's right," she said, her tone smooth but firm. "A marriage between our family and an outsider should not be taken lightly." Judah's eyes narrowed at the table, though he didn't respond directly to the criticism. Instead, he simply turned to Leah, offering her a tight smile. "Everything will be fine," he muttered, almost as if trying to reassure himself as much as his fiancée. But Leah's expression was unreadable, her siren eyes sweeping across the room. It was hard to tell if she was nervous or simply unaffected by the tension that swirled around her like a heavy fog. As everyone took their seats at the table, the scrutiny of Leah continued. Morticia, with her graceful elegance, studied the woman with a polite smile, but piercing eyes. Gomez, ever the charming and dramatic figure, made a show of adjusting his suit, attempting to break the heavy silence. Uncle Fester, bald and slightly eccentric, sat at the far end of the table, his face a mix of curiosity and quiet disdain. Grandmama's hair swept into an elegant updo, observed Leah closely, her sharp eyes calculating. Tyler could almost feel her silent assessment, but she said nothing, choosing instead to simply stare at the newcomer. It was clear that the Addams family did not easily welcome outsiders into their fold. Meanwhile, Pugsley entered the room, casually walking in with Thing perched on his shoulder, the disembodied hand offering a wave as it scuttled across Pugsley's back like a mischievous pet. The moment he entered, the tension in the room seemed to shift, and Pugsley's easygoing attitude provided a slight relief, though the underlying unease remained. "Are we gonna eat or just stare at each other?" Pugsley asked with a grin, looking around at the guests. He didn't seem to care for the formalities, which was a refreshing change from the quiet tension that had dominated since Leah's arrival. Tyler couldn't help but smile a little, his gaze flickering between Wednesday and the others. He felt like an outsider in this house, even more so than he did with the Galvins. But one thing was clear, the Addams family had a bond stronger than anything, and it was that bond that made them wary of anyone who threatened the status quo. And Leah, with her pale skin, blonde hair, and unnervingly entrancing eyes, was most certainly a threat. But to what, exactly? Tyler wasn't sure. And until he understood, he would keep watching, just like everyone else. Dinner was served shortly after, but Tyler found himself distracted, his thoughts still lingering on the strange unease in the air. No one had said it, but there was a sense that this was more than just a family gathering. The Addams family had a way of keeping their secrets buried deep beneath their perfectly maintained surfaces, and whatever Leah's role was in all of this, Tyler had a feeling that tonight, things were about to get a lot more complicated. "Let's eat," Gomez said with a dramatic flourish, though there was little warmth in his words. "But don't expect the usual pleasantries. This isn't just dinner. This is an introduction." And Tyler couldn't help but wonder, what exactly was Leah being introduced to? Meanwhile, in Jericho, it was around noon when Miss Thornhill stepped into Sheriff Galvin's office, her every movement deliberate, her smile practiced. "Sheriff Galvin," she greeted, her voice dripping with a warmth that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I know it's none of my business, but I thought you should know." "Tyler lied to you." Galvin didn't look up from his paperwork, but his ears pricked up at the sound of her voice. How so? Well, Miss Thornhill began, her words carefully measured. One of the mayor's kids' friends posted something on social media. Tyler's not in Mexico like he said he was. He's with Wednesday Addams and her family. I thought you'd want to know. Sheriff Galvin's face remained neutral, though a spark of disbelief flared in his eyes. He had suspected something was off with Tyler, but this? His son had lied to him, and for what? The Addams family again. His thoughts quickly turned to a darker place. I should have stopped this when I first learned that he was involved with her, Galvin muttered under his breath, his gaze shifting to the papers on his desk but seeing nothing. His mind wandered back to the stolen artifact, to the whispers about the Addams family, to the last time Tyler had been involved with them. When that book went missing. Wait, what book? Miss Thornhill asked, her voice pitched just right, curious, but feigning innocence. She leaned in slightly, as though she were a confidant, intent on hearing every word. Galvin's jaw tightened, and his voice dropped to a low growl. An old artifact was stolen last year. We suspected Wednesday Addams. She was seen at the scene, but there was no concrete evidence. Still, she was involved, and my son was with her. Miss Thornhill nodded slowly, her face the picture of sympathy, though there was something calculating behind her eyes. She let the silence hang for a beat, just long enough to make sure Galvin's discomfort festered. I thought as much, she said, her tone almost too sweet, too knowing. Wednesday Addams is a bad influence. Her family tolerates everything she does. Honestly, Sheriff, it's concerning. They're trouble. And now your son's wrapped up in it, hiding it from you. Galvin's face darkened, but he kept his gaze fixed on Miss Thornhill. He had seen enough of this woman's manipulation to know how she worked, pulling the strings without anyone noticing, playing on his prejudices and fears like an expert. But he couldn't help himself. There was something about her concern that felt genuine, even if he knew better. She took a step closer, lowering her voice, leaning in as if the next words were meant for him alone. And don't even get me started on her cousin Adele, she continued, her words slow and deliberate, as if savoring every syllable. I've had enough of her. She's the worst. She wouldn't let Wednesday face any consequences for destroying my plants. Instead, she blamed me, claiming Wednesday was just retaliating. Miss Thornhill's eyes flashed with a mix of indignation and thinly veiled malice. I was only trying to protect those kids, trying to keep them out of trouble. But Adele, she turned everything on me. Now, they all hate me. It's honestly exhausting. Sheriff Galvin's jaw clenched at the mention of Adele's name. The woman had been a thorn in his side ever since she'd started interfering with school matters, always siding with the outcasts and stirring the pot. She'd always been a troublemaker, just like her family. And Miss Thornhill's complaints only fanned the flames of his resentment. To Miss Thornhill's credit, she knew exactly how to fan his fears, how to appeal to his biases. She was a master manipulator, her every word a carefully crafted weapon aimed at Galvin's insecurities. She let the silence drag on a moment longer, ensuring the sheriff's mind was swirling with suspicion. Then, she dropped the final, venomous remark. To make matters worse, she sighed heavily, shaking her head in feigned exasperation. The principal always takes her side because she's her former student. The whole system's rigged in their favor, Sheriff. No one will hold them accountable. The words sank in like a stone, and Galvin's expression darkened. His frustration with his son, with the Addams family, and with the town's outcasts, began to bubble over. He knew Tyler had been lying, but now Miss Thornhill had given him a perfect enemy to focus his anger on, a whole family, really. And she'd made it clear who was to blame. Sheriff Galvin stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor as he looked Miss Thornhill in the eye. Thank you, Miss Thornhill. You've given me a lot to think about. Her smile was sweet, too sweet. I'm just looking out for the kids, Sheriff. I'm sure you understand. As she turned to leave, Galvin's gaze lingered on her for a moment longer than necessary. His thoughts churned, clouded with resentment, worry, and a mounting sense of betrayal from his son. But Miss Thornhill had given him the ammunition he needed. She had guided his suspicions into the perfect storm of judgment, and now there was no turning back. Out in the hallway, Miss Thornhill allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. She had done her part, planted the seeds of doubt in Galvin's mind, nudged him closer to the conclusion she wanted him to reach. She had played her role perfectly, and she could already hear the whispers that would follow. The sheriff, for all his authority, was easily swayed by someone who knew how to speak to his fears. And she had a talent for speaking directly to those fears. As she walked out the door, the familiar satisfaction of having manipulated the sheriff's emotions wrapped around her like a warm cloak. She didn't need to wait long. She knew exactly how he would act next. She had already won. Like, comment, and subscribe to be notified for updates on this series.